Hi, so in this video we're going to be looking at how we can run a program in the PowerVR emulator, how the sort of framework works. Okay, so there's 5 main things that we must have in our code to allow us to use the PowerVR framework, and also there's some exercises to some practical work for you to do to try and get your heads around how we can remove certain code into another class so that we can start to use object-oriented programming. So, excuse me. So the first thing you can do is actually open up the first lab, which is introducing PBR Shell. If you run this, you will see that there's a yellow triangle on a blue background. Okay, so it's very, very simple. And what I'm going to do in this video is to just go through some. Okay, so over the course of the next few weeks, we'll be delving a lot deeper into how the graphics is done. Okay, but for today, very basic. Going to look at the requirements that we must have for the PowerVR framework, and then a little bit of code to see how this triangle is drawn. So we can open up OpenGL-ES introducing PBR Shell.cpp. So this is our main code. Okay, so if we scroll down, the first thing we will see is that our class inherits from this public PBR shell. Now this shell is the sort of main class that we need to inherit from when we're using the PowerVR SDK. Okay, so when we're using the PowerVR framework, we need to inherit from shell. This is going to create the window for us and the graphics context. It does all the hard work for us. Okay. Now there's a lot of things here that I'm not going to cover today. Okay. Over the next few weeks, we'll be introduced to a lot of these things. Okay. What I do want to show you today in particular are these 5 methods. So we've got Init Application, Init View, Render Frame, Release View, and Quit Application. These 5 methods are being used inside the PowerVR framework. We need to override those 5 methods so that we can have some control over the framework. So the framework will allow us to do certain things depending on whether we're in these methods and what we actually want to do. Okay. So the first one being the Init Application. So this is where we initialize things. Okay. Now it's important to know that this is only run once. Okay, so when we very first start the application, the PowerVR framework will do lots of things and it will tell us when we can initialize the application. And this is what it uses to notify us. So in here, excuse me, we can set certain things. So we can set things inside the PBR shell. Okay. In fact, we're setting the color space here. We may want to, if we've got an object, maybe we want to set up its positions or something like that, or we want to initialize some states. Okay, so this is sort of general initialization. If we want to define something to be used in our application, or if we want to set some parameters, we can do that. Quit application, well, this is called when the program is about to finish. And it means that what we can do is we can release any allocated memory if we've allocated anything using dynamic memory. And it's just a way for us to clean up things that we've got open and maybe we want to close them. Init View. So this is initializing the view. So this is to allow us to do any initialization to do with the API. So this is when a valid graphics context has been created. So this is where we can set up all our OpenGL ES states or calls and objects and so on. As I say, over the next few weeks, we will delve into all of the things inside here. Okay. And in fact, in this example, we're actually using this to create a fragment and vertex shader. As we'll see in future weeks, we can actually load these in dynamically. And there's all sorts of things we're doing in here. We can set up the colour that we want the background to be and so on. But don't worry about the majority of this code. We will be coming to this at a later date. But one of the things that we are doing is setting the background colour. This is the clear colour. This is that blue background that we've got. So when we run our software, this background blue is this clear colour. So actually, if I wanted it to have a much more of a red tinge, so we've got red, green, blue, and then an alpha. Alpha is to do with like transparencies. So 1 is fine, that's opaque. Now we've changed that red from no red to full red. 0 is none, 1 is full. Once it's built, we will find that the background now has a lot more red in it. Here we go. So as you can see, it's a pink colour because we now have full red, 40% green and 70% blue. So I'm just going to put that back so that it looks familiar to you if we run this again. Okay, so the other methods that we need is one is release view. So the release view, this is called when the application sort of is starting to go away, so when the view is being released, and it allows us to release any API calls. So there's lots of things we're doing here. Okay, we haven't looked at this yet, but we are going to create a thing called a vertex buffer object, so we want to get rid of it. Our program is what we use to store our vertex and fragment shaders, and so we're going to get rid of that. Okay, so this is just a way of cleaning up any resources that we created in the initialize view. And then so finally, the fifth method that you must implement is render frame. And this gets repeatedly called over and over and over and over again. And this is where we're going to draw all of our scene. Okay, this is where we draw all of our geometry. In our example, we've got our blue background, or we can change that as we've seen. And we're going to draw our triangle on top. So, for the main parts of the exercises that you'll be completing in this lab, the two places where you want to be taking code from is, well, firstly, the Init View. Okay, so if you look at Init View and scroll down, you will find this piece of code. Okay, for this video, I've just put these notes either side of it so you can easily see where these are. What we're going to do, well, this is creating our triangle. So the first thing we're going to do is define the positions of our vertices. So a triangle has 3 corners. A corner of a triangle is called a vertex. So we need to define the X, Y, and Z coordinate, because it's a 3-dimensional world, of the first vertices. So the first corner of the triangle has its X, Y, Z value. The second vertex of the triangle has its X, Y, Z value. And then the third vertex, the final corner of our triangle, has X, Y, Z values. So this vertex data at this point, we're just defining where those vertices are, where those corners of the triangles are. So we have an XY position, XY position, XY position, because we've got 3 vertices. Then we're creating a vertex buffer object. We will be looking at those later on in the module. However, what this is a vertex buffer object. This is creating a handle to a location on the graphics card where we're going to store these 3 vertex positions. We bind to our VBO, okay, our vertex buffer object. That just allows us to then send over the actual data here. So this is the data in this array. We want to send that to our VBO that we've just bound, and we want to specify the size. Well, we've got 3 vertices. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and each vertex, okay, has 3 floats in it. Yeah, so each vertex has 3 floats, and we have 3 of them, and that's just sending all of this data, all of the vertex positions, and it's going to be stored in our VBO. And the other thing we need to see is how once we've got our triangle created, is how do we render it. So this is in render frame. And again, I've put a top and tail sort of indicator here so you can see it. When we want to render our triangle, we first of all want to bind to our vertex buffer object that we created. Don't worry too much about this, we will be seeing this in future, but we need to specify that what we've got here is an array with our vertex information. We specify how many points this has, so we've got 3 values in the vertex, because we've just got an X, Y, Z position for each of the vertices. And then we're going to draw our triangle. Okay, now we're just specifying that we've defined our objects in triangles. In fact, we just have 1 triangle. We're going to start with the first vertex, and we're drawing 3 of them. It's 1 triangle, so it has 3 vertices. And that's pretty much it for the beginning of this lab. Okay, so what's important is that we can set up a vertex buffer object that stores our triangle. And then what we can do is we can use that vertex buffer object to draw all of the triangles. In this case, it is just 1. And that will create our blue background, but it will have this yellow triangle on top.